The city of broad shoulders and tough politics turns a new page. For the first time in 30 years, Chicago has elected a mayor whose name isn't Daley or Emanuel. Lisa Desjardins reports.
It was a landslide, history-making victory. And Chicago's new mayor-elect, Democrat Lori Lightfoot, said Chicagoans made clear who and what they wanted.
You did more than make history. You created a movement for change. We can and will finally put the interest of our people, all of our people, ahead of the interest of a powerful few.
Lightfoot, who is openly gay, will be the first black woman to lead the city. She's an attorney, and she's a relative outsider to Chicago's political scene. She distanced herself from the current mayor, Rahm Emanuel, even though he previously named her to oversight posts. Starting with the primary in February, Lightfoot bested 13 other candidates, including former White House Chief of Staff Bill Daley of the powerful Daley family. And in yesterday's runoff, she easily defeated Toni Preckwinkle, a longtime fixture in local politics. Lightfoot appeared with fellow Democrat Preckwinkle today, and Preckwinkle pledged to work with her former foe.
We have some real challenges ahead of us in our county and our city. And I look forward to working with Mayor-elect Lightfoot to address those challenges.
Lightfoot herself comes from a working-class background, and her resume includes stints as a federal prosecutor and president of the Chicago Police Board. She inherits a city still struggling with gun violence and a deep sense of the haves and have-nots in the role of police and in the city's much-scrutinized school system. Those are themes for Lightfoot, and she is pragmatic and direct in approach. It's something she displayed when asked today why it took so long for a black woman to be elected mayor.
I can't look into the crystal ball, right? All I can do is the here and now. Here I am, and now we move forward.
I spoke to Mayor-elect Lori Lightfoot earlier today and began by asking what she thinks her win means.
Well, I think the way in which we won, which is getting support from literally every ward in the city, is historic mandate for change. Chicago's been under the grip of the corrupt and broken political machine for as long as everybody's memory. And I think people realized that something was problematic, that we needed to have change, but weren't confident that it was possible. I think the way in which I won in February really gave people optimism and hope that we could go in a completely different direction. And I think this broad mandate that I got last night is a real prescription for change.
Your city has been in the headlines too often in the past few years for violence. It's something you have talked about, and specifically in your campaign, you say you want to address the illegal flow of guns into Chicago. But how do you do that as mayor of the city?
Well, first of all, you've got to make sure that our federal partners in the U.S. Attorney's Office, ATF, FBI, DEA, not only here in Chicago, but all the states that are sources of the illegal guns, they've got to be focused on a coordinated and proactive strategy to go after the gun dealers, the traffickers, felons in possession, and the straw purchasers. If we focus on those individuals in a coordinated way, then I think we're going to see significant drops in the number of guns that are coming into our city, and then, as a consequence, a number of gun-related shootings and homicides.
So do you see this as an enforcement issue primarily, or are there new gun laws you think the city needs to put in place?
Well, look, I think it's got two major pillars. The violence that we're seeing is really an epidemic. It's a public health crisis, and what we haven't done is look enough at what's the root causes. A lot of what we're seeing are crimes of poverty. And that means that people don't feel a connection to the legitimate economy. And that makes sense when you think about the fact that we have 25% unemployment or higher in the crime-plagued neighborhoods. We have the vast majority of people that live in those neighborhoods are on some form of government assistance. 40% of African-American children in the city are living in poverty. What that cries out for, to me, is a need to invest in our people, in neighborhoods, small business, rebuild our neighborhood schools. And if we focus on those things, we're going to absolutely drive down violence and create an environment and an infrastructure for positive change.
On the subject of policing, you're a former prosecutor, but you've also come out during this campaign saying that you think sometimes police are reaching too far, perhaps in the use of the gang database there in Chicago, that you think maybe some people are getting tagged in the justice system inappropriately. Obviously, there's a trust issue in Chicago with the police. Can you talk about the balance with law enforcement and police? Should something be done there?
Well, look, the police can't be effective if they are not viewed as a legitimate force for good. So we have to continue the hard but necessary work of bridging that divide and having a multiple databases, which is what we have right now, that have people who got in it 30 years ago. There's no transparency around it. You don't know how you get in. You don't know how to get off. So what I've said is that database has to be decertified, and only when we have a process that is transparent, that demonstrates to people what the onboarding process is, and a transparent way to get out of a database can we stand up a new one. I'm meeting with the superintendent of police, and that will be one of the primary issues that we talk about.
You've talked about the forgotten Chicago and making sure you bring development and resources to the part of Chicago that's outside of the gleaming downtown, especially the South and West. But we've heard this from politicians from Chicago for years. How do you make that happen? Well,
number one, you got to deal with the violence, because nobody's going to invest in neighborhoods where they don't feel safe, where their employees aren't going to be safe, or their property's not going to be safe. That's kind of the overarching issue that really affects every other thing that we want to do to uplift the quality of life in neighborhoods. And then the city itself has to come up with a comprehensive plan for economic development, which we do not have, which means we've got to go into those economically distressed neighborhoods, listen to the people there, engage in a conversation about the assets and opportunities, and then use that information to develop a comprehensive plan in which we can drive progress.
Of course, one of the national headlines coming out of Chicago recently involves actor Jussie Smollett. I know you've been getting a lot of questions about this.
I do.
To remind our viewers, Smollett was charged, and police say he was guilty of filing a false police report, but the charges against him were dropped with almost no explanation. As a former federal prosecutor yourself, what do you think about the role of privilege? Is there too much role for privilege in the law enforcement system in Chicago?
Well, look, privilege should never change the outcome. No matter your financial status, no matter your celebrity, everybody should face the same level of justice. And that's the concern that we have in this case. And first, let me say, we need to make sure that we understand hate crimes do happen. People are targeted as a result of what they look like, how they, the God that they worship, or who they love. So I don't want to dismiss that. But in this particular circumstance, within 5 weeks' time of when the charges were laid out, and it seemed like there was an overwhelming case against this individual, suddenly the state's attorney's office dismisses all charges with no acceptance of responsibility on the part of Mr. Smollett. I think that begs for an explanation, and I've been saying now for a week since this issue came up that the state's attorney's office has to give a much more fulsome explanation so that you eliminate the perception that if you're rich or you're a celebrity or both, that you get better treatment than the vast majority of people who are making their way through a torturous criminal justice system.
Finally, I've got a bit of a personal question for you. I read that you grew up in a working class family, both parents working multiple jobs, and that you particularly credit your mom, who came from the segregated South, with being a driving force in your life. I'm curious, what does she think about this historic win?
You know, my mother is a fascinating person, and what she says to me is, this is how I raised you. I wanted you to be able to take advantage of opportunities that are out there, to be strong and fearless, and feel like you had the confidence to be anything that you wanted to be and take on any challenge. So I know she's very proud, and I'm grateful for her being my mother, but also being a constant presence in my life.
Mayor-elect Lori Lightfoot of Chicago, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.